Hello, it's Toaster Party, and today I'm going to be talking about my picks for the top 5 best mono-white Planeswalkers in Modern. So there's a lot of Planeswalkers in Modern, and I figured it would be really neat to do a top 5 list of the best ones for each color pair. So I decided to start off with the list that would have some of my favorite Planeswalkers in it, mono-white. But without further ado, let's get into the list. Starting off with number 5, Elspeth, Sun's Nemesis. This is a 4-drop from Theros Beyond Death, with 3 abilities, all of which are minuses, starting with up to 2 target creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn, create 2 1/1 white human soldier tokens, and a -3 that says you gain 5 life. What actually makes this card good, though, is the last effect on the card, which is the escape cost of pay 4 generic and 2 white and exile 4 other cards from your graveyard. That means that you are going to be able to have access to this card even late in the game, which will be really helpful in certain matchups where you just need that little bit of resources to put you over the edge. It's also very good in specific matchups, which comes to the faults of this card. There are some matchups where this card is just really not good. And the other problem is that despite the fact that it's supposed to be a grindier card, it doesn't have any abilities to increase her loyalty counters. So despite the fact that you're going to probably be wanting to cast this more than once, it will eventually run out of times you're going to be able to use it, and you'll eventually run out of graveyard to recast this with. So let's move on to number 4, Gideon of the Trials. This one's a 3-mana Planeswalker from Amonkhet, whose first ability is until your next turn, prevent all damage target permanent would deal. 0 until end of turn, it becomes a 4/4 human soldier with indestructible that's still a Planeswalker that prevents all damage dealt to him this turn. And finally, and the most relevant, you get an emblem with as long as you control a Gideon Planeswalker, you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. That last ability is very unique and can shut off several strategies, such as Goblin Charbelcher, which wants to kill you in a single shot, any Thassa's Oracle related combo deck. There's a few others, but what really makes this card shine is the fact that it has a very low mana cost for that kind of effect. So it is a reasonable card that you can bring in those kind of matchups. And it also works as a decent finisher because a 4/4 is still pretty good. And the +1 ain't too bad either. But that's pretty much all it is. If you're running this into matchups where the every so often 4/4 body, the damage prevention for 1 target permanent, or can't lose the game doesn't really matter, like say burn, then this card can be pretty dead in the water. Up next, let's move on to number 3, Elspeth, Sun's Champion. This one's an incredibly strong finisher with a +1 that makes 3 1/1 white creature tokens onto the battlefield, which means that you'll have a pretty easy time of being able to defend this Planeswalker. It also has a second ability, that being a -3, that destroys all creatures with power 3 or 4 or greater, which makes it even easier to keep this thing on the field in case the +1 isn't going to do it for you. And finally, it has a finisher ability of creatures you control get +2 and have flying, which means that after making all those 1/1s, you'll probably just be able to kill your opponent from there. But mostly, you'll be able to win with just those first 2 abilities. The only problem with this card is that it's a 6-drop, and that's very costly for Modern. If you're paying 6 mana, it's usually to cast something that can win you the game pretty easily. So let's move on to number 2, Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. This card is really good. It starts off with a +1 ability that turns him into a 5/5 human soldier ally with indestructible that prevents all damage done to him this turn. It also has a 0 ability that puts a 2/2 white knight ally creature token onto the battlefield, and finally a -4, which can be used the turn he comes down, that says you get an emblem with creatures you control get +1/+1. So what makes this card good is that for a reasonable mana cost, it is a very fast game-ending clock. Because the turn he comes down, you can make a 2/2 white knight ally token, and then the following turn, you can go +1 him, put him up to 5 loyalty, and then you're swinging for 7. That, if your opponent does not have a board, is probably going to close out the game within 3 turns. and probably faster because in Modern a lot of people are using stuff like Shocks fetches, so their life total will be lower than that and will be a lot easier to get down quickly. Another thing is that even on completely empty boards, or not completely empty boards, you can start using the Zero ability to make constant token generation to either defend the Gideon, or as just a way to build up a cohesive board to be able to start swinging in for lethal. And finally, just in case those first two effects aren't really helping you right then, you can immediately cash in Gideon for a strong emblem effect. Like if you really are trying to close out the game immediately and you have, say, a lot of Lingering Souls tokens, you can just immediately -4 him and then suddenly you're swinging with a lot more damage. But let's move on to number 1, and probably the obvious number 1, the Wandering Emperor. This card is incredibly versatile. And one of the best parts about this card, if not the best part about this card, is the fact that it can be cast with Flash, meaning that you don't have to tap out to be able to invest in a Planeswalker. The abilities come as follows. +1, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. It gains first strike until end of turn. -1, create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance. -2, exile target tap creature. You gain 2 life. So this card is almost always going to be at least a 2-for-1. Because when it comes down, you're pretty much always going to be using it to either make a token to block a creature, give a creature a +1 counter to block a creature, or exile target attacking creature. And your opponent's then going to usually have to use some sort of removal to be able to get rid of it afterwards, because you're usually doing this either during combat or end step. Meaning that your opponent will have used 2 cards for the cost of your 1. There's a reason why a lot of Modern control lists have started using a few copies of the Wandering Emperor aside from the other really strong Planeswalkers in their list. Well, that's all I had to say today. Thank you all for watching. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you all have an excellent day.